We'd like to start the second part of the symposium. In the second part, we will hear from 5 presenters, and quite tight schedule as a result, so we'd like to proceed. The first speaker is Professor Shinichi Tanabe from Waseda University. The presentation is titled ZEB Roadmap and Decarbonization of Buildings. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. I am Tanabe of Waseda University. I have the honor to speak for about 20 minutes. So first of all, March 31, I was called to the upper house. For the first time, I went inside the Parliament building. There is the Committee on Economy, Trade and Industry. I discussed about energy efficiency. I discussed with Mr. Ono. I did not expect it would be such a torture for myself. Professor Tanabe, you can always say I have no recollection, like past politicians, about corruption. There was a 15-minute presentation, and there was a Q&A for 19 minutes. The members of parliament are very serious. They were highly technical questions as well. 3rd of July, the 5th Basic Energy Plan was approved by the government of Japan. Regarding buildings by 2020, for the newly constructed, on a step-by-step basis, the compliance with energy efficient standard will be mandatory. From April 2014, buildings larger than 2,000 square meters, there was energy-saving compliance standards. However, just by mere compliance, 26% of the CO2 reduction cannot be attained. And therefore, as a more harsh compliance, ZEB, net zero energy building, will be our goal. As is indicated, whilst raising our quality of life but improving energy efficiency. So in the past, we thought we just had to suffer dark rooms, which is very hot, but that is not the case. We are going to improve efficiency by being wise and comfortable. For newly built, in terms of the buildings per year in Japan, about 500,000 buildings are newly built per year, including detached houses. Buildings larger than 2,000 square meters, non-residential, only 3,000 buildings are newly built per annum, and these will increase. So in terms of construction approval, only 200 or 250 buildings will be in compliance. It accounts for only 0.6 of the total buildings, but these account for 33.7% of energy consumption. So these few but large-sized non-residential buildings consume the energy the largest. 300 to 2,000 square meters non-residential, that's 7.5%. Again, they consume 30% of the energy, but the number is 10 times larger. In order to regulate, the administrative cost will also be 10 times larger. In the case of Japan, most of the residentials are detached, but 450,000 buildings are mostly detached houses, but consume about 1/3 of the energy. So this will require 100 times more administrative cost to regulate. So the scope of the regulation is under discussion. In terms of the government, it's about the cost and the benefit. The government is thinking hard about the scope of regulation. 5 or 6 years ago, annually, more than 150 houses provided by businesses. These businesses who build and sell houses, they have to comply. At that time, only 30% or so of the newly built houses are compliant with the standard, but now that has gone up to 95%. Built and sold houses, not that expensive or luxury, but 95% of those comply. Either prices or the installations, they have become very reasonable, and 50,000 are made. The so-called ZEH, zero energy housing. For fiscal 2017, 42,000 of ZEH houses have been built. International people are surprised about the number of ZEH houses in Japan. When I say 40,000, the international people are surprised. In 2016, there were more than 30,000 ZEH houses. And therefore, amongst the newly built residentials in Japan, most of them are becoming extremely energy efficient housings. We do have lots of existing stock buildings. How to retrofit those already standing buildings are also important. For the newly built, we have the BELS labeling system. By saving the energy in the designing, you will qualify for the label. For the housing, 56,000 residential buildings have received these labels. However, the existing stocks, including apartment and housing, where people are already living, they have to be labeled. But by secondary marketing in houses, if the housings are better insulated or if the energy is better, people will be incentivized to lease better houses or purchase better houses. That will be directly reflected into the housing prices. By the way, in Europe, is a required explanation for the properties to advertise or to deal with properties. Energy efficiency labeling is a must. It is mandatory. The BELS labeling for the non-residential, I mentioned 3,000 per annum. Only 1,000 is qualified. Do you think 1,000 or 3,000 is large or small? But I sincerely hope that more will qualify for BELS labeling. So if it is just below 100, and if you simply merely comply with the standards, many might think it's better. But if they think about the higher market value with this labeling, I hope they will understand. So with a building with at least 4 stars that they will not lease, if the tenants' voices rise in that way, market could be stimulated. Next is ZEB. There are different definitions of ZEB, which is troublesome. In 2015, METI, Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, defined ZEB. At the Academic Society, where I am the chairperson, Society of Heating, Air Conditioning, Sanitary Engineers of Japan have made it. And the definition is based on the designing, because after use of the building, if ZEB is required, those who are using that building already, if they are working overtime or tenants increase, it will be difficult. And therefore, like a fuel economy of cars, it should be calculated based on a particular formula. For a larger building, going completely net zero is difficult. So if there is a 50% reduction in consumption, it's ZEB ready. 75% of net saving, nearly ZEB. Completely over 100% is ZEB. And I'm called Debu, which means fat pig in the Japanese language. But ZEB is not an original English. This is a Japanese language. So what ought to be done? First of all, as Dr. Emery mentioned, OA load has to go down. There must be de-bloating, the load reduction inside the room, and passive architecture method or energy harvesting, daylighting or daylight harvesting. How to utilize the natural light from outside. For example, having a window, but if there is a building right beside it, daylighting is not possible. And therefore, how to use the blessing of the daylighting and more efficient equipment, use renewables, use off-site renewable. There is a hierarchy in the approach. About energy harvesting. Japanese buildings traditionally used daylighting and natural wind. And this is the Mika mandarin orange. This is the harvesting of the fruit. If urban climate deteriorates, no matter how you open your window, you will not enjoy the breeze. So to lower the temperature in the peak of summer, it is very important. So to think about the space between buildings, or greenery can be observed outside the window. Urban planning is also very important as part of energy harvesting. There is passive architecture, but just like solar cell, passive architecture will enable energy harvesting. ZEB. When we started announcing this at academic societies, 50% reduction is possible. That was the response. The national government, including METI, they made this guideline. This guideline can be downloaded free of charge. In the US, 50% reduction guideline and design manual is available. So this download is free of charge. These are pamphlets for building owners. Already, the download is above 30,000. There is a program, web program, which is, in order to calculate for the bills labeling, there is a calculation sheet, an Excel sheet, for inputting the data. By placing that in the server, there will be automatic calculation using your own window or to expand spaces. This calculation sheet will be very useful about the possible effect. Or what about daylighting? Or what about PV benefit? This will allow you 10,000 square meters or 2,000 meters offices, middle size or small sizes, elderly care houses, supermarkets. These are available. And most recently, we have a guideline for hospitals. We are preparing guidelines for schools and hotels for 50% reduction. Again, this will be available with a web program calculation sheet. You are all welcome to utilize them. Local government authorities, many are trying to retrofit their offices. Kaisei is just beside Hakone of Kanagawa, and they will make a nearly ZEB building. Construction has started. Many local government authorities are looking at BCP resilience in order to prepare for disasters, and therefore many have started to embark on these kind of 75% reduction is nearly ZEB. So at the design, they have already been certified. And Lawson is one of the convenience store. They have made a zero energy convenience store. They have made a second store. The definition of ZEB in Japan does not include the showcases. So there will be some consumption, but 22 kilowatt of PV, 61% of energy is saving. The store opened in February 2017, and their design has been qualified. A mini stop of Aeon Group last year, 1,000 stores have been registered for ZEB, and certain companies whose name includes the number 7, they were stimulated, and they also said that they will start a ZEB convenience stores. At the stage of designing, just like automotives, the fuel efficiency, like 30 kilometers per liter. But what it actually, the performance in driving is important, but the car air conditioning is calculated in fuel efficiency, and therefore the air conditioning will be a net expenditure, and it's up to how to drive. But academic societies, we will need to calculate. At Society of Heating, Air Conditioning Center Engineers Japan, there are 14 advanced cases. So this is the 14 advanced cases, including the Takenaka and Taisei, Obayashi, and many other advanced buildings are introduced. This can be downloaded free of charge, both in the English and the Japanese language. Please welcome. Please access this. ZECH. Mr. Oyama will be talking about this later, so I will not go into details, but zero energy housing, very much in the detached houses. This is the solar decathlon, a competition of universities. We have also competed with our designs. What is most important, traditionally, the photovoltaic, there was the FIT program. By the end of 2019, we all have to graduate from the FIT tariffs, which means increasing in-house consumption will be critical. This is our proposal. So estimating the sunlight, daylight, traditionally, EcoCute would have been used during the nighttime to warm the water. But if the forecast is that tomorrow it is going to be sunny, that can be done next day. Then it can be used as storage battery, and therefore operation pattern can be adjusted. When heat pump is used during daytime, it is efficient because temperature is higher. So these are some of our advanced research areas. Not only batteries, but heat storage is another important factor for collective housing. The definition of JET is also required for collective housing, and this is the definition for multi-family apartment buildings for the entire building and for each of the dwelling unit. For the whole of the building, it would be difficult if it is multi-storied or high-rise, but from this year, subsidies is available, and of course, ultimately LCCN. Traditionally, in the case of power, it was generated, transmitted, and consumed. And if consumption is reduced, that was called better efficiency. But with larger renewables, frequency, voltage adjustment will be a challenge. The thermal power plants will have to be adjusted for housing and the buildings. They have a huge potential to provide that adjustment. This is California 2017 power transaction during the daytime. It was a negative power price. This is already happening. This has to be capitalized. So renewables can be used wisely, and this will be a huge contribution to reducing consumption. To put it simply, there's power from the grid, or gas is supplied. Traditionally, the buildings, they try to reduce this white arrow. They thought that was energy conservation. However, there would be PV rooftops, electric vehicles, fuel cell deployed. Then it could go the other way around. Information of power goes the other way around, and the gas, it can warm the water. So this would be a contribution to resilience in BCPs. Traditionally, from a single unit, it would be an entire smart energy network. Efficient use of energy for the entire network. It should be another definition. It's not energy conservation. Emory says energy efficiency. IEA also says energy efficiency rather than saving or conservation. RE100. Promoting REs. There are many organizations and entities. Riko, Sekisui, ASCO, Daiwa House, major Japanese companies also are declaring that they will go 100 renewable. This is exactly ZEB. So zero energy buildings, if it increases, then it's a contribution to RE100. As Professor Murakami mentioned, there's the SDGs. 7.3 to double the energy efficiency by 2030. So this is the ZEB-ready definition, a 50% energy reduction. If the operation is the same, it would be the same reduction, but at the same time, GDP should be expanded. And for promotion of that, there is ESG investment. Large enterprises follow this principle, and then there is divestment, which is the reverse of investment, withdraw investment, discontinue investment. They will decide not to invest. They will pull out, withdraw investment, which is a major impact. Regarding ESG investment, not only making money or being profitable, but non-financial or pre-financial information. So versus the financial, it's not yet a financial information, but it could be a progenitor to financial information. So the non or pre-financial information includes ESG, environment, women's advancement, comfort, wellness, or governance, including fair competition, that it is not unfair. The stock price will go down when corruption is exposed. Particularly in Japan, there is GPIF. We have a massive whale-sized pension fund, and this is promoting this investment. Finally, this is my book on housing. If you purchase my books, you will understand more, and it's exactly my time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Tanabe. That was a very broad-based presentation, very fun to listen to. Let's proceed The next is a presentation from Renewable Energy Institute, and Mr. Masaya Ishida, a manager from the business group, and will speak to the theme of renewable energy global use, choose more. Professor Tanabe talked about the relevant issues. My name is Ishida from the REI. I have 10 minutes, and I would like to talk about renewable energy and the global choice, the latest the situation. And this, the graph that you are looking at right now is showing that the companies around the world, how much are they purchasing the renewable energy. And all these renewable energy contracts are long-term contract. The unit is 1 million kilowatts in terms of output. It's equivalent to a large-scale nuclear power plant. So every year, about 4 to 5 the nuclear reactors are being the size of the renewable energies that the corporate sectors are signing contract to every year. And this is particularly prominent in the case of the United States. There is the fluctuation from year to year, but 2018, as of 6th of August, we have already achieved the highest level on record. That's equivalent to 4 units of nuclear reactors in terms of the contract signed. And the letters are a little too small, but what's written here are the companies representing various industries, and they are now signing contract for the purchase of renewable energy. And one example here, which is General Motors. General Motors have 7 plants in the United States concerning which they will switch to 100% wind power before the end of this year. So they made this type of announcement already. And by 2050, they have 350 facilities in 59 countries around the world. And by 2050, they will go 100% renewable energy. And Toyota recently in Japan have they invested 10 billion yen for the Renewable Energy Development Fund. They made the announcement that they will make that type of investment, autonomous driving, electric vehicles, and renewable energy. The automotive industries have identified these as being the most important management issues. And RE100, the Dr. Tanabe has referred to, more than 140 companies from around the world has already participated, and there are 12 companies from Japan who has signed on. And I picked up some of the companies from the construction and real estate industries, Germany, UK, China, Ireland. So we have companies belonging to RE100, and Daiwa House and Sekisui House from Japan said that by 2040 they will go 100% renewable by 2040. And why so many companies are buying renewable energy? And the biggest the goal is to mitigate climate change. But at the same time, you can control electricity costs in the long term. It will create new business opportunities, and also there is increasing requests from the investors and business partners to use renewable energy. And let me introduce some specific examples. First of all, with regards to cost. What you can see here is a comparison of generation cost in the major countries. Blue is onshore wind, yellow is PV, and gray is a thermal power plant. And countries outside Japan, onshore wind and the PV cost is equivalent to thermal or even less than the thermal power generation. And if you look at Japan in detail, the cheapest case is already as low or very close to being at the level of thermal power generation. And looking into the future, we expect this to come down even further. Say, for example, in the case of the PV, by the beginning of 2020s, it would be equivalent to more or less the gas-fired thermal power plant. And by the latter part of 2020s, what is the most cheap in Japan right now is a coal-fired thermal power plant. But the PV will be more or less equivalent to coal-fired thermal power plant or lower potentially. And onshore wind will then become more or less equivalent to gas thermal. And in the 2030s, onshore wind PV will be costing less than the thermal power generation. So that's the forecast that's already available. Not just the utilities, but the general companies are starting to understand that there is a cost benefit from using renewable energies. And this slide is IKEA, the furniture manufacturer, and they actually opened a large store in Aichi Prefecture last year. And there is a 1,300 kilowatt worth of the solar panels on top of the roof, and is able to generate electricity equivalent for supplying 360 households. So majority of the daytime, they can actually accommodate the electricity needs. At nighttime, they actually purchase a little bit from the utilities. And there is 12 units of chargers for the electric vehicles on the roof as well. So customers who come to the store using the electric vehicle, while they are purchasing their furnitures, they can actually recharge their batteries for free of charge using electricity generated by the solar the panels. And they're able to go home after they finish shopping without generating any CO2. So they've already started a service of that nature. And I said that there is going to be business opportunities and there is an increase in requests from investors. I mentioned that before. And what you see on the slide right now is what was agreed to by the financial the industry last year. And this is the framework related to the task force on climate-related financial disclosure. And what type of risk will companies be facing because of the climate change? By working on climate change, what type of new businesses are likely to be created? That was analyzed, and the effort is to evaluate this from the financial perspective. We'll see a spread of this on a global basis going forward. So if you don't work on climate change, or if you do not want to use renewable energy, then these companies will be considered to be risky from the perspective of investment. In other words, these companies may find it more difficult to find financing. Daiwa House is quite proactive in Japan in this area, and by 2040, they will use 100% renewable energy. And in terms of energy consumption, well, they will double the sales per energy consumption. So they will reduce energy consumption and they will increase sales at the same time. That is the strategy that they have taken. Specifically speaking, in the case of housing at ZEH and ZEB, smart cities, smart towns, by working on these, the company intends to expand business and will go decarbonized. And request from business partners is the last point that I mentioned earlier. And in this respect, it's Apple of the United States who is probably most advanced. Apple have many power supply companies around the world, and there are many business partners of Apple in Japan as well. If we look at the situation in the upstream area, we have a company called Ibiden, and this company already use only renewable energy when they manufacture parts for Apple. They've already made this declaration. They're working on this. In the terms of product sales in the downstream area, Apple has a store in Shinjuku called Apple Shinjuku, which is on the first floor of the Marui main building. And Marui, from September this year, they will introduce electricity generated by wind power. So they've already started on this. So these advanced companies is having ripple effect towards the companies in Japan as well. Eventually, unless you work proactively towards using renewable energy, it could potentially have adverse effect in the business relationship. So that could potentially be the situation in the future. We have people from the construction and the building industry, so I wanted to share this with you. Apple is working on various things around the world. This is an example from Singapore. On top of the high-rise building, there's the solar panels position, and about 800 locations in total. The electricity generated here are used by the Apple sites. In Japan, too, last year, in Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, about 300 locations, in fact, 300 buildings, they've installed the solar panels. And Apple is providing support for such project. They've started things like this. In California, in the U.S., Apple has their new headquarters, which was completed last year. It's a donut-type building, which is significantly large, and they have the solar panels on top. And the output is 17,000 kilowatts. Added to the electricity generated here, they will also use other form of renewable energy to achieve 100% renewable. By increasing renewable energy, we are able to replace fossil fuel, which will lead to suppressing the climate change. And I hope the similar type of effort will expand in Japan as well. With this, I'd like to complete my presentation. Just last point of PR. We also issue a guidebook, and these are available outside this venue. So if you're interested, please pick them up. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Ishida. The next presenter is with regard to ZEB and ZEH. We'll hear introduction about the practical the usage cases. And the first presenter is the principal engineer from the Environment Department of Takenaka Corporation, Mr. Hiroaki Takai, will speak to the topic of renewable energy introduction and using ZEB practices.
Thank you for the introduction. Takai from Takenaka. I would like to thank all the members of REI. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. The title is Renewable Energy Introduction and Use in ZEB Practices. In Chiba, we have our Higashi Kanto branch of our company. I shall specifically introduce what we did with our building. Dr. Emery Lovins, I have to thank you very much. Thank you for referring to our business. That was a great honor. And referring to our endeavor. So how to reduce energy consumption in the existing small and medium-sized buildings at the stock? That is the challenge. Offices smaller than 10,000 square meters, that accounts for 98% of the offices in Japan. The smaller buildings, the envelope accounts for a larger percentage. The challenge is to improve energy efficiency for the outside. But then it is important that the tenants can remain in their place, that they do not need to temporarily relocate. This building was completed first in 2003. This was used as an office for 12 years. From October 2015, this was retrofitted within 6 months, and the fresh building is used from 2016. This is the inside after the renovation. On the left-hand side, there is the workplace. On the right-hand side is the communication area, the shared space. And there is a glass partition surrounding the filing area. So the northwest and southeast, it's full curtain wall open. And this is the spec. This is in Chiba City, 2 stories high. Area is 1,318 square meters, not a large office. So the concept of the retrofit, there are 4 points. First of all, emphasis is on the comfort. Daylighting, natural ventilation, utilized at maximum. The temperature, humidity, airflow are controlled in order to make it as comfortable as possible. The second point is energy consumption reduction. First of all, the best insulation of the envelope and sun shading thoroughly improved. A direct use of LED lighting, radiative air conditioning, and use of geothermal solar heat. Number 3, change the work style. The work mode by the workers are changed so that they will share the common space so the plug load can be reduced. Number 4, as a result, energy consumption goes down significantly. As a result, uptime becomes longer. Using renewables, on the whole, BCP performance enhancement is part of our goal. The point is the design of the building, design of the system, changing the application operation, all of these are designed in an integrated manner. Those who place the order, designer, builder, manufacturer, the tenant, or the users, the concepts are shared by all the stakeholders from the beginning, and the goal is to realize the plan within the planned budget. In order to work in a smart way, the working place, communication area, filing areas, or how we selected, they can choose the place to work, which means this is an improvement of the universal office design. Multiple technologies are deployed, but I will briefly introduce. For example, the exterior, we removed into super windows, correction, not super windows, but a highly insulated glass, and there is a second glass, and there is an external blind. It's double skin, a perimeter load down by 60%, and low E glass with argon gas in the cavity. 1.2 is the level as Dr. Lovins. It's not exactly a super window, but compared to the low E glass, the level is half. During summertime, a borehole system is used, and geothermal heat is collected, and directly it is sent to the ceiling panel for radiative cooling. What is not sufficient? A heat pump chair will back it up, and during the winter, there is the heat collection panel to warm the water. Desiccant air conditioning, I will talk about this later, but dehumidification is conducted by this. During the winter, the hot water is sent to the ceiling for heating purposes. If it is not enough with a heat pump, it can be backed up. As for the effect, in terms of cooling in the summer, direct use of geothermal covered 40% of the required energy. Heating in the winter, a solar heat accounted for 20%, and the heat required for desiccant air conditioning for summer, it was sufficient with solar heat. To prepare for disasters, solar PV panels, solar heat collection panel, reuse lithium-ion battery. These are prepared at the minimum required level and are constantly utilized. And this is the plan to reduce the energy consumption. So by the plan, technology, and the operation, the actual energy consumption for the building, 1,400 megajoule per square meter per year has gone down to 400. The remaining 30%, it should be covered by solar power. This is before the retrofit estimate, after the retrofit, and the actuals after the retrofit. And the result is almost close to our planned goal and realized net zero energy. 470 megajoule per square meter per year means 13.5 kilobtu per square feet. That's a 13.1 kilo BTU per square feet. The power generation is 470 megajoule per square feet per year, which is 13.5 kBTU per square feet. And the LCC based on this. In the case of retrofit, by reducing the energy cost, the payback is roughly 20 years. If this is newly built, the payback will be 14 years. The work intellectual productivity will rise, overtime goes down, and then the payback will be 12 years or 8 years, respectively. And next is about how to control the air conditioning. There is the ceiling radiative air conditioning, desiccant air conditioning, and a personal diffuser, natural ventilation, all are automatically controlled. And the desiccant air conditioning, it's hugely compact. We have developed and we market a very compact, small size, which can fit inside the ceiling. So we realize low humidity during summer. There is a heat exchanger, and solar heat and geothermal can be utilized. And this is the actual room temperature. In August, it was between 26 to 26.5 degrees Celsius, humidity 50%. In February, temperature 22 to 22.5 degrees Celsius, humidity 40 to 50%. May, it's natural ventilation, and the distribution is wider. Next is natural ventilation. This is the opening at the floor level, and top light ceiling is used for natural exhaustion. And this is the measurement. The flow speed in the room is 0.2 to 0.4 meter per second. Temperature goes down by about 2 degrees Celsius. Ventilation frequency more than 10 times during daytime, 2 to 5 times of ventilation during nighttime. And this is the thermal image for different seasons. In the winter, it's 24 at the ceiling, 22 at the floor partition, 22.5, 13 on the glass surface. So the temperature fluctuation is small, which means this is a very comfortable radiative environment for the workers. And this is the personal diffuser. So directly to the face of the worker, there is an airflow. This is a personal nozzle installed in the ceiling at strong mode. At the face, 0.8 meter per sec is the speed at the face. Workers enjoy this diffuser when they come back to the office from working outside. Apple Watch, smartphones, these wearables are utilized, and depending on the health situation of an individual, the diffuser's airflow or the ceiling temperature of the radiative air conditioning can be adjusted, which is wellness control. For different zones, this is the measured level. Metabolism of each of the worker is constantly measured. Individual workers will declare whether they are comfortable or uncomfortable. By integrating this, personal fan strength is changed, radiative panel temperature are changed depending on the individual in order to improve the comfort for each and every worker. This is still in a test period, but already we are seeing rising satisfaction by all the workers. Going back to energy consumption, before and after the retrofit, the capacity of equipment and actual use of energy for air conditioning. The second floor, both the central heat source and the geothermal solar is used. The ground floor, first floor, meeting room, and there are tenant areas. The luminaire was changed to LED. Envelopes insulation was improved by reducing the load. This is only a general heat pump system, but the outdoor unit has downsized. In the upper part, it is indicated that the equipment capacity has been halved, shrunk by half. And the lower graph is the actual energy consumption. First floor consumption has gone down to 1/2 or 1/3. The second floor, where we use the central heat source revolution, it's 40% smaller compared to the ground floor. This is the annual energy balance. energy generated is 470, in-house consumption 403, purchased from the utility 203, sold 217. At the lower part, this is the full-day charge discharge control, the actual. The upper is where there was no charge discharge control. So the discharge, based on the forecast of the weather, the demand and the peak hour is forecast, and the timing of the discharge is controlled. Self-sufficiency rose from 54 up to 67%. In the very near future, and we shall graduate from the FIT purchase price, we are not going to be paid for the solar power generated, and therefore the storage battery shall have to be capitalized so that self-sufficiency can be raised further. Before and after retrofit, and this is the actual consumption on the right-hand side, this is when renewables are included. Lighting, air conditioning, ventilation, each of them went down by 70%, and net zero has been realized. Renewables and energy consumption for the whole building, geothermal and solar, with this unutilized energy, we cover 30% of the energy required for air conditioning, and with photovoltaic, the entire consumption of the whole building is accommodated. Conclusion. So this building is a first case where it is a net ZEB by retrofit, and it was a building that had already history of 13%, and the plug load has gone down, and we retrofitted whilst we did not move out at all. There was not only energy benefit, but comfort improved, work productivity improved, work style changed, and it's an office that make our workers healthy by walking. BCP has improved. These are lots of co-benefits. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takai. Next, the presentation is regarding ZEH. And the General Director at ZEH Association, and also President and CEO of EcoWorks, Mr. Takashi Oyama. And he will speak to the title, Application of Renewable Energy for ZEH and its Contribution to the Grid. Hello, everyone. I am the Representative Director of Association for Promotion of ZEH. In Kyushu, they run a company called EcoWorks. And today, I will speak to the title, Application of Renewable Energy for ZEH and its Contribution to the Grid. The Professor Tanabe has already talked about the overview, so there could be a little duplication. But I'd like to cover two themes mainly. First is the definition and roadmap for ZEH, and the second is definition and expected contribution to regulating capacity of the grid with regards to ZEH+. And we have people from outside the housing industry, and so I will explain some basics as well. First of all, the definition. This is the qualitative definition of ZEH. So amount of energy consumed in a year at a house is roughly 0 or less on a net basis. There are the four aspects. First is high insulation for energy conservation. Second is for high-performance facility, energy conservation. And the third is energy generation through the PV. There are also the qualitative the standard. But they will try to achieve ZEH based on primary consumption. So energy conservation and the energy creation, so the economic benefit is already achieved. But I wanted to think a little bit about this. And this is the 10 years for the FIT period and the 20% after FIT, so economic benefit. The vertical axis is investment. And the blue is roughly ZEH, and the red is LCCM, the housing. If here we are only looking at the PV power generation, but in any case, roughly at about 10 years, we can achieve a payback. And after that, and we have no decision on the feed-in tariff price at this point in time, but roughly speaking, 11 yen of cash eco-cute, daytime use, and EV usage all included, it will be about 11 yen per kilowatt hour. And if we use that, the graph will end up being like this, and from 25 years to 30 years, and assuming the usage. In the end, between $1 million to $2 million economic benefit will be achieved, which will become the large engine for the ZEH becoming more widely used. And apart from the economic benefit, there is a co-benefit, which is the resilience. In recent times, and just in the last few months, we had the typhoons and a large earthquake in the Hokkaido, which has led to large-scale blackout, and also the blackout being prolonged for a long period. And this is CASB's residence housing checklist that I have referenced here. But the question is, do you have any power source available in a blackout? And also, particularly in the wintertime, you prepare for a few days. You must keep off the cold without heating. But both of items are satisfied. And from the perspective of resilience, we are seeing a great attention from the general customers. Given this as the background, what is the current take rate? And I'm comparing fiscal year 2016 and 2017. And there is about 6,600 ZEH builders who are registered. And the companies who supply more than 50% of ZEH houses, that's 522. House makers are three, mostly it's regional builders who fall into this category. And about 1,300 companies, less than 49%. About 1,800 players overall is currently promoting the usage of ZEH. And for the market, we started from the custom-made detached houses, and the custom-built houses every year built at about 200,000, and last year was 42,000, which has already become a zero ZEH house, which is 14%. And going forward, we've set a target, but by 2020, fiscal year 2020, more than half of the custom-built houses, and towards 2030, the custom and also ready-built houses achieve, on average, the ZEH. And this is on the assumption that all the new houses will be ZEH, both for the custom and the ready-built houses. And we'll talk about ZEH Plus, and this is part of the technological development. But there will be a demonstration project going forward, and ZEH Plus will attract more interest going forward, and I will talk about that from here on. The definition of ZEH Plus. So you have the ZEH and ZEH Plus, and the subsidy is 700,000 and the 1.15 billion yen. And so there are the three aspects which is included. Further, the insulation. So great energy conservation in ZEH Plus versus home energy management system is also introduced. In other words, the remote control of electrical appliances can be done. And the third is EV charging or the discharging. So there are these the requirements. And I talked about the feed price coming down. And if the feed purchase price come down, and even in after feed period, that will be sought after. And the next step for ZEH is to expand the self-consumption ratio, like I've talked about the 3 points. First is that we want to maintain the heat from the daytime to nighttime. In other words, high insulation, which will lead to reducing the heating energy during the nighttime. The second is usage of eco-cute and things like that during the daytime, not using the nighttime electricity, but using surplus electricity from daytime to account for heat. And the third is charging of EVs. use using surplus electricity for cars. And through these usage, we want to increase the self-usage rate. And another reason why we need to see greater usage of ZEH Plus, this is output control being an issue. I'm in Kyushu, so this is attracting a lot of attention. And the normal people who are planning to build houses, they're starting to ask questions. This is on the 3rd of May this year, the line graph is showing the demand and the actual volume in bar graph, and from for the 24 hours, and peak 85% by solar, and the others, nuclear and coal-fired, is there, and because of supply-demand balance being collapsing, using the pumped storage and also the interconnection to use the same quantity at the same time in order to prevent a blackout. This type of work has already started. Kyushu on the verge, Shikoku as well, and it is said that the output control is likely to come into place in autumn this year. In the near future, because of during the electricity at the peak of solar power generation, we'll see greater supply than demand, and so there is a function for supply-demand balancing. And I've actually brought this, what will happen is that first the thermal power plants will shut down, the pump storage stations will start, and we're already here in the case of a Kyushu example. And the cases like TEPCO and or the Tube Electric or the KEPCO, they're not in this type of situation because the demand is larger. But in the case of Kyushu, we have one grid, and this it will be the first case in the main islands where the output control is likely to be implemented. So the mega solar will be curtailed, and finally household solar curtailment. So if we have to face curtailment, then we should use electricity ourselves as part of self-consumption using the EH+. And this is the PR related to the output suppression, output control. And this was run on the 8th of September in all of the newspaper in the Kyushu district, and talking about the need for implementing output control, try to gain understanding the general citizens. And in order to accommodate more renewable energy, they're saying that they have to stop every now and then. But they have said clearly here that they're not going to do this for the residential the power. So that's the background. And the ZEH Plus is expected to play a part in balancing of the grid. And like the Dr. Tanabe has referred to, there is going to be the demand response and the virtual power plant. Together with these, the ZEH Plus is likely to be promoted more going forward. And this is my last slide. And here, on the power generation station side, and towards 2050, the renewable energy is to be positioned as mainstream electricity, and this is described in the fifth the energy strategy. And Japan, unlike Europe, we are somewhat lenient towards the PV. So this is likely to generate greater fluctuations. And from the grid side, towards the balancing, they need to use large the storage batteries or the others, but from the H2, but there is also a greater role expected from the residential side, like storage batteries, EVs, heat pump, daytime usage, to achieve a demand response. And the grid side, when there is a large amount of generation, they'll try to increase demand to function that balancing aspect. But when the grid side is low, then the solar power generation or the storage, the batteries or EVs from the residential side through internet control will serve like a small the power generation plant to supply electricity to the grid side. And that is what is being expected. And today is an event of REI, and so the expansion of the renewable energy is going to be a big theme, but for the residential part, we will play a large role as well. But as a whole, we want to contribute towards a greater usage of renewable energy, and that is the measures under ZDH. And I'd like to complete my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Oyama. And now the last presentation. Last presentation is myself. I forgot to introduce myself. I am the manager of the climate change group belonging to the Renewable Energy Institute, and my name is Yuko Nishida. And allow me to change positions.
This is the last presentation, so it would be part of the conclusion of the presentations. Across the world, there are active policies and related movements. There are many interesting movements across the world. I would like to introduce them. First of all, just to remind ourselves, in the building and construction, how much does this area account for in terms of emissions? 40% of CO2 emissions derive from building and construction. It includes the related industry as well, but the whole point is it accounts for a very huge portion of the global emission and therefore highly responsible. Having said that, energy consumption reduction speed not going down fast enough. What is shown here is the recent few years, how the energy consumption in this area is going down. So a rapid increase has been suppressed, but then the absolute reduction has not started. The graph on the right is per square meter final energy consumption. Finally, the energy consumption per unit has started to go down. However, the Paris goal, not more than 2 degrees rise, in order to fulfill our Paris commitment by 2030 in this area, compared to 2015, the emission has to go down by 30%, 30, which is indicated by the blue line, which means we are lagging behind. But there is also a good news. Thankfully, in this building and construction area, we have already heard from many speakers already. Technology to reduce emission, methods and technologies already are available. I think that's a good news. According to version 5 of IPCC, with the existing technologies, if they are used widely, even if the building area triples or doubles and with larger population, despite larger building areas, using all the technology, the energy consumption can be maintained at this level or can be reduced. Going forward, in order to accelerate consumption reduction, policies and actions will become increasingly important. One key policy would be energy code and standards for buildings. Energy efficiency standards or codes. Finally, in Japan, it is becoming mandatory. Across the world, there are many countries and regions where it is not mandatory, which is a challenge and actions required. About Japan, the final energy consumption by a sector and the CO2 emission, this housing and the commercial area, it's a very huge percentage. 35% derives from this area, the housing and the commercial. And this is the trend of the energy consumption. Compared to global, in the case of Japan, energy consumption reduction has started. However, the CO2 emission After the 2011 disaster, there was some impact of using thermal, and finally, bit by bit, we are starting to observe the effect of reducing the consumption. And looking at the emission, the Japanese energy mix compared to other major economies, dependence on fossil is still large, whether it's power mix, natural gas, coal accounts for a large portion in Japan. Against this backdrop, going forward, G 80% reduction. There is a long-term strategy under review towards this goal. How can we reduce the greenhouse gas reduction? First, must reduce energy consumption. In terms of this building area, the envelope has to be better insulated, energy equipment efficiency has to be improved, and secondly, decarbonization of the source of energy. In the building area, more renewables, more renewable power and heat utilization will be required. On-site PV, solar heat, geothermal ground source. In addition to that, renewable must be introduced onto the grid, and the energy source must be decarbonized and change the energy to be used. In this commercial and residential area, a major technology is heat pump, which is already available, and therefore, ultimately, it will be electrification and use renewables. Probably this would be the ultimate goal. Today's topic is energy efficiency and the synergy between renewables. There is the hierarchy in this construction area. Reduce energy consumption, improve efficiency, that comes first, naturally. However, that is not enough. By better improvement and consumption goes down, the share of renewable will increase, which is a synergy. From the micro perspective for improving efficiency, as Mr. Oyama has just mentioned, in the household, more than the in-house consumption, there will be a positive power provided to the grid from the household because of surplus. And the electricity system, renewables must be expanded. In the case of Japan, our grid balancing capacity is inflexible. We heard about Kyushu Electric demanding curtailment. And in that situation, the tool that can support the balancing to improve efficiency and to expand the mix of renewables, both will receive higher attention and become more important. This is according to IRENA. This is the scenario analysis by IRENA. In Japan, this is the analysis of CO2 emission. The point is to improve energy efficiency or to increase renewables by pursuing each of that alone may not be efficient, but by doing both in parallel, there will be a synergy. And some of the advanced leading cases of other countries or regions. First of all, California, zero net energy building policy or code. As Amory discussed briefly, in April of this year, a new zero net energy code has been introduced, which will enter into force from 2020. For new build housing, PV will be mandatory. Insulation standards enhanced, other standards made more difficult. But by expanding photovoltaic and building new houses with the goal of zero net, that it is highly cost efficient. And this is a pamphlet by the state of California. At the upper right, initial cost 1.2 million yen, and there will be return of 2.5 million yen over 30 years. So this brochure emphasizes the attractive cost benefit. Another point is demand response technology, that this is a strong aspiration by the state. So it is still an option, but hopefully in the future, they envision the introduction of demand response. In EU, they also have their own policy. Based on the EU directive, each of the member states shall have to establish their national plans for net zero energy building. UK, ahead of other countries from 2016, zero carbon home goal was established. It was once rescinded, but after that, what remained was this. And the City of London, although the central government rescinded, the City of London decided that they will follow on. And from 2016, a zero carbon home regulation is in place in London. Under this, major developers are mandated to build zero carbon housing. Zero carbon home, compared to reference insulation standards, they shall have to comply with stringent insulation standards. On top of that, renewables are to be deployed. And if there is deficiency, there will be a CO2 offset fund. At this City of London, this is incorporated into the urban planning. Within the process of building approval, offset price is collected. This is incorporated in the CO2 offset fund and utilized to deal with mitigating climate change. Finally, just the other day, there was the Global Climate Action Summit. By 2030, to make new buildings net zero carbon by 2030, 19 global cities across the world have committed, and the Tokyo Metropolitan Government is included and is a signatory. By 2030, I mean, we have no time to lose. We just have to initiate our action right now. Going forward, net zero carbon and decarbonization in our buildings and constructions, I would like to encourage all of you so that we can work together. Thank you for your attention.
So we are starting to run out of time, but we want to utilize the remaining time to ask the presenters to come up onto the stage so that we can engage in discussion.